the financial pressures that institutions are facing, and at the same time, they are less able to access the financial support they so desperately need. The member is absolutely right. Now is not the time to look at raising tuition for students. Students are struggling with the same affordability pressures that all of us are around groceries and rent. And the cost of basic essentials.
For the questions, I recognize the member for Ottawa South.
Thank you very much. So I'd just like to ask the member if she thinks it's strange that while the government's removing red tape, the RCMP are about to wrap police tape around what you love.
Back to the member for response.
Thank you to the member for that question. It is rather ironic. It is rather ironic that we are debating this legislation to reduce red tape at a time that is unprecedented in the history of this province. I believe that we have a government that is under active investigation, criminal investigation by the RCMP, and you know, one of the schedules in this bill deals with agriculture, and this is at a time when the government was ready to pave over huge swaths of the greenbelt in this province. The government was ready to remove all of this vital farmland that feeds our province and out of our province, vital wetlands that help mitigate climate change. It is highly ironic, and I appreciate the question.
On question, I recognize the member for Oakville.
Thank you, Speaker. I just wanted to ask the member opposite about Schedule 6, which relates to credit unions and Caisse Populaire. As you know, our government's been committed to Caisse Populaire and credit unions since taking office in 2018. Subsection 174 of the Act was amended to remove the requirement that membership shares or patronage shares not be used in certain purchases and sales between credit unions. I just wanted to get the members' thoughts on that particular.
30 seconds for response. Back to the member.
Thank you, Speaker. Like many of the schedules in this bill, and I've already said that, there are some modest, beneficial changes in this bill. That would be one of them. But overall, this bill does very little, Speaker, to address the real challenges that we are facing in this province. Thank you.
8, I recognize the member for Don Valley West.
Thank you, Speaker. It's an honor to rise this evening on Bill 139, reducing red tape reduction. Overall, this bill it's fairly innocuous. I expect that it's a bill that I will be able to support. A quarter of the schedules, 5 out of 20, relate to term limits on boards. Again, some cleanup to things that I guess the government wants to take action on. So fair enough. One of the things though that strikes me is that the government is opening up the Securities Act here, and that's something that's of real interest to me as a former business person. And I think that there's a real opportunity that's being missed here in this bill. Every province in the country, this government talks about red tape reduction, right? 11 bills and $950 million. I'll talk more about that in a few moments, but every other province in this country recognizes when a company gets listed on its exchange, it allows that company to list on the province's exchange. So for example, if a company lists on the TMX, that company is basically allowed to, very, very easily register on the BC Stock Exchange. And that reduces red tape for businesses. It reduces red tape for businesses in Ontario. It reduces red tape for businesses across the country. And that's something that actually does drive productivity, which is, again, something I'm very interested in. Did you know, Madam Speaker, that Ontario is the only province that is not part of a system called the passport system, which allows this co-registration, this harmonization of securities legislation? So it actually is a big burden on other companies who are wanting to list in Ontario, and that brings business here to Ontario. So that would be something that would actually be meaningful in terms of the markets and allowing companies to reduce the red tape that this government is very excited to talk about. So I would encourage the government to think about that, to think about joining in with the rest of the country. Instead of being an outlier, be a partner and join in harmonizing securities legislation for companies in Ontario and across the country. You know, the Minister of Red Tape Reduction has a disposition to talking about the savings created by these various legislations, $950 million. And I kind of have, said to the minister in the past that, wow, that number just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And yet, Speaker, there's no proof to this number. This is a number that the government estimates, it makes up, it comes up with a few assumptions and extrapolates across a number of businesses. So I would actually invite the government to think about putting their numbers to the test. Let somebody audit their numbers. Let somebody, they like to talk about their clean audit opinions. $950 million is a lot of money. I would love to see a clean audit opinion about $950 million of savings to businesses here in Ontario. I think if we're doing it, that's great, but I think when we talk about accountability and being able to, demonstrate real action, instead of just talking, they should be actually measuring and giving us some evidence on those numbers. The other thing that number says to me is that the government is talking a big game about what these bills are achieving. And again, they might be making some modest improvements, and I will grant that. But in terms of that kind of savings, Speaker, if that were the case, we would actually likely be seeing an increase in GDP growth in Ontario, and yet the latest financial economic outlook shows a decrease. So, again, Speaker, we see some inconsistencies here with, big numbers being thrown around about savings and red tape reduction. I'd like the government to put their money where their mouth is and actually audit those numbers and give us some real evidence that is the case. The rate of bankruptcy of small businesses is going up in Ontario. So again, if these bills are doing so much to help businesses in Ontario be more productive, more efficient, why do we see an increase in bankruptcies in this province? That's data from Stats Canada. The other thing, Speaker, that I think the government should think about is productivity. Productivity is a word that doesn't appear in this legislation. Productivity isn't just about reducing red tape, it's about actually making workers more efficient, making our economy more efficient. And one of the things that, again, I've talked about several times in this House is daycare for families. And while the government is talking now about raising hourly wages for ECE workers, which is commendable, it's very late. We've got families who are waiting for daycare spots, and one of those parents is sitting at home taking care of their child while they wait for a spot to open up. And that's actually hurting the productivity of our province. It's hurting efficiency, and it means that there are less tax revenues coming into the coffers of the province to pay for all of the services that we need.
But we don't even get services though, so what services
night,
really?
The members across have
Forced highways on us?
Affairs and Housing in particular talked about how there were, some of us weren't here last night. Well, let me just tell them where I was. I was at an event in my riding talking about just this, productivity, scalability for businesses in Ontario. We had a speaker, a professor, an economist, talking about what is holding Ontario back from scaling its businesses, what is holding Canada back from scaling its businesses. And Speaker, I can tell you, red tape did not come up once. What did come up is how do we help these businesses commercialize, get bigger faster? And so, Speaker, I would really love to see some focus from this government on helping businesses commercialize. And it was interesting. It was an eye-opening discussion. Dr. Charles Plant was our guest speaker, and he talked about one of the things that Ontario and Canada are not doing is tapping into the marketing and sales experience that we need. So while we talk about innovation and R&D, and those are important factors, that we actually need to be spending time on expanding our ability to market and sell our products. So again, reducing some red tape, that's marginal. That helps. It's what we call helping at the margins. But if you actually want to make a real difference in helping business in Ontario, let's talk about how do we help them scale? How do we help them export to foreign markets, to tap into bigger markets? That really does drive productivity and growth in our economy.